And thanks so much for watching Morning Live. Now, South Africa's national debt will exceed 70% of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, in the next 3 years. And that was the warning from Finance Minister Tito Mboweni as he delivered the medium-term budget policy statement yesterday. Now, he said that bailing out state-owned entities and public service wage bill had brought huge pressure on an already depressed economy. Mboweni also outlined government's plan to grow the economy and to reduce government expenditure. The minister announced some measures to deal with the country's economic crisis, but economists say that the suggested cuts in spending are not nearly enough to deal with the current debt situation. Busi Mavuso is the Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership South Africa, and she joins us now to dissect that particular policy statement further. Thanks so much for coming through this morning.
Thank you for inviting me, Sakina.
Let's just jump straight in, Busi. If we look at what we are faced with at the moment, our debt, our budget shortfall, I should say, at the moment as a country, 52.5 billion rand. Let's talk to that situation.
Really problematic. You know, we are estimating that at least in the next 4 years, 2023, the debt to GDP ratio is going to be sitting at 70%. Absolutely unsustainable. And I think it is sad, Sakina, because we are in this situation just because as a country we are failing to make some of the decisions that we know we ought to be making. I think having come from a lost decade as a country, we knew that these are some of the painful decisions, or we knew that we were going to have to make some of the painful decisions. So why we continue to kick the can down the road actually baffles me. So we are therefore going to have, you know, a situation where you find the IMF coming in to take these decisions that we actually are, you know, backing down from actually taking. And it will actually be unfortunate because the IMF would walk in when the country has got a balance of payments problem. South Africa doesn't have that problem. The problems that we're actually confronting are within our control. We can actually do something about it. So the issue of SOEs, for instance, there is no reason why we should continue bailing out these SOEs. And I absolutely agree with Tito in as far as that is concerned. These SOEs are going to have to start being treated like normal businesses because that is what they are. So trying to continue as if it's business as usual, for me, is counterintuitive and it's unwise. It is plunging this country further into economic crisis, and it is really putting the lives of 59 million South Africans at stake. So actually, I find that we as leaders, political and business, political in the main in this, as well as this board of directors, are actually, they're at the brink of being, you know, or rather of acting as delinquent directors because they are not making the decisions that they know they should be making to actually, you know, ensure that the country is salvaged from this economic situation that we find ourselves in. So we're going to have to also agree as a country that are all of these SOEs strategic? Do we really need 772 SOEs, Sakina? And all of them are actually in the same state. Should we not be deciding which ones are strategic and which ones that are not? And the ones that are not strategic, then let go of them. If it means that you actually bring in strategic equity partners, people who can actually assist, you know, from a financial perspective, from a knowledge perspective, from a skills-based perspective, let's do that. I think we're actually romanticizing this idea of ownership. And unfortunately, you know, it is just not practical in terms of where we find ourselves. So we actually have, you know, clear decisions to make. But you see, this is actually irritating. It is actually boring, you know, and I think not just to South Africans, but it's to actually the international community as well. Because I think for the past 2 years, that is what we've been saying. We're saying that we have to make the tough decisions. Why the decisions are not being made baffles me. I don't understand that if you're standing at the edge of a precipice, if you are close to falling over the cliff, would the natural reaction be not of wanting to save yourself? And if you agree that that is where we are as a country, then why are we not doing it, you know? And yes, there are going to be some sacrificial lambs. There can't be any holy cows. And if it means that that is what it's supposed to be, then so be it, you know. And I think we talk about the issue of the public wage bill, you know, and we say that we can't afford any more unemployment as a country. But then you're going to have to decide, Sakina, do you actually go ahead and cut, you know, some of the people in SOEs, or do you actually plunge the country into economic crisis? Because unfortunately, our options are both evils. We're just going to have to agree which one is a better evil that we're actually going to have to go for, because the status quo is unsustainable.
Let me pick up on some of the points that you raise and perhaps moving towards answering the question that you posed there. when we talk about strategic state-owned enterprises, should we also not be looking at why they are where they are? What has happened? Because you talk about the intervention of the International Monetary Fund, and these Bretton Woods institutions will enter the fray at a specific point. But as you say, our problems are self-made. They are self-created.
Absolutely.
Because these state-owned entities were not always in the state that they are in now. So what happened? You talk about boards of directors and delinquent directors. We have seen over the years how directors had basically been recycled from one state-owned enterprise to the other. So why aren't we addressing those questions? Because, and before you answer, let me just put this in. I saw an article about Transnet, and we know Transnet's woes are also very well documented, but there you have Popo Molefe and his group of leaders at Transnet who have come up with a way to save R1 billion, which is nothing to be scoffed at given what we are dealing with right now. So it shows that where there is a will, something can be done.
Absolutely.
So when we talk to the strategic nature of these SOEs, surely we should interrogate why they are failing right now and what has brought us to this point.
And I think that is a very critical point. And I think if you're going to appoint a board of directors, I think allow them the space to do what they need to do. You know, and I think the example that you're giving at Transnet is actually a very key and critical one, because you're going to have to understand where the fiduciary responsibility lies, right? And it lies with irrespective of how many structure you put on top of the board of directors, right? Whether you put technical committees and presidential committees and whatever the case is, who is held finally accountable are these board of directors. So they are therefore going to have to be allowed the space to do what they need to do, because they unfortunately can't go to the courts and say that we did raise these things and we're not allowed to do these things. So I think that is a key and critical issue.
Earlier this week,
but I think you also,
you yourself said that there's political interference on one of the boards, the board that you sit on at Eskom. So how are you then supposed to turn this entity around? Talk to us about this, because we blame the executives, we blame the boards as the broader public looking on. But what is actually going on here?
But I think you actually raise a very important issue as well, Sakina, around what got us here. And I think that is the issue, for whatever reason, that we know, all of us as South Africans, but for whatever reason, we're actually skirting around the issue. You know, we know that the state capture project in this country actually, you know, focused on these SOEs, and there was a deliberate hollowing out of these SOEs. And they're sitting where they're sitting precisely because the decisions that were made by politicians, by the board of directors, and by us as business, because we were complicit, you know, in hollowing out these SOEs.
Now, I'm glad you
it has actually,
that.
exactly, right? We actually led us to the state that we're in. So having come out of that, therefore, we're going to have, we knew that we're going to have to actually do some serious turnaround strategies to actually salvage ourselves out of the situation that we find ourselves in. So we therefore, you know, are going to have to be allowed the space to actually ensure that, you know, the turnaround strategies that have to be implemented, irrespective of how tough they are going to have to go ahead and be implemented. So give the board of directors the space to actually do what they need to do, because I think trying to keep up a facade and a fuss that all is well, when we know that all is not well, is actually not helping South Africans. Because what you're actually going to have, you know, is actually, you know, going to be sitting with a situation where, you know, we are at a fiscal cliff, you know, as a country, and we are getting very close to that, you know, where the revenue, and Tito was actually very strong on that yesterday to say that the problem with us as South Africans is that we think we can go ahead spending, you know, monies that we don't have. And unfortunately, borrowing and debt is not a solution, because you can't borrow yourself out of the situation that you put yourself in.
But who is borrowing? Who is spending? Who is spending? Because, so, and part of, I suppose, the outrage for ordinary South Africans is that we are picking up the tab for spending and for corruption and malfeasance that we are not a part of.
Absolutely. And I think if you are going to have to borrow, you're going to have to be clear as well, Sakina, that what are you borrowing for? Let's borrow for productive assets. Let's borrow to generate, you know, assets that are actually going to ensure that people get into jobs and therefore the economy is stimulated. Now, borrowing to pay your finance costs and borrowing to actually,
to
you know, exactly, to pay salaries, you know, and borrowing to, it is actually, it's not helping, right? So I think we therefore are going to have to be clear in terms of how do we actually move on from where we are at, you know, and I think that the political will is going to have to be there to do some of these things, because unfortunately, when all is said and done, government is the one that is in charge. But then in looking at this, government is going to have to realize that the mandate that South Africans gave them on the 8th of May was to actually, say that assist the country and assist us as South Africans to actually get out of this economic rut that we find ourselves in. So the decisions that we make, therefore, on a day-to-day basis as government, are actually going to have to be in that line and in that vein. And we cannot, as I've said, pretend as if it's business as usual, because it's not.
So let's bring a practical example to the table. E-tolls. So here you have a classic situation where the minister yesterday announces you are going to have to, as users, pay for using these roads that have been tolled. And you're getting mixed messages from the political from the political party that is the ANC, in a minister of its own, and through other leaders of the party in terms of that. And I think that was one of the huge election talking points for Gauteng province, the e-toll situation. Yeah. So what's supposed to happen here? Because the electorate is clear. Yeah. We don't want to pay for it. We did not ask for it. Nobody asked us. Yeah. At least this is what the electorate says. Yeah. So what's supposed to happen here?
The ANC has actually dug this hole for themselves, and they're going to have to find a way of actually getting all of us out of this hole by having created a crisis of dependency. Now, the culture of non-payment, has not always been there. But for whatever reason, through the false promises that this ANC-led government has given South Africans, you have, subsequently created that culture, of non-payment, and therefore a crisis of dependency on the state. And I think it is e-tolls, but it is also, Soweto Eskom, right? And it is municipal debt, right? And when you actually, as Eskom, say that we are actually going to load shed these municipalities, that are not paying, or can we at least get National Treasury to pay Eskom directly so that Eskom can start dealing with their financial situation? Then, but of course, you can't go there. That is, it's taboo. It's actually, a no-no. So it actually is a problem, to say that. So how exactly are we supposed to fix the problem that we find ourselves in? So it's actually useless, to sit and ask the board, as the standing committee did the other day, to say, what are you doing with municipal debt? What kind of a question is that? We know that the issue of municipal debt has got absolutely nothing to do with this board, and it's got everything to do with political will. So unless and until politicians actually, agree that we're actually going to have to move on, or we're actually going to have to fix the issue of municipal debt, it is not going to happen. Unless and until politicians agree that Soweto is going to have to start paying for services, it is not going to happen, because when they campaign on that ticket of saying that we're either going to write off the Soweto debt, or you actually are not going to have to pay for e-tolls or whatever the case is. So we have created this mess as politicians, and now we're going to have to find a way of how do we get ourselves out of this rut.
Just a final question. Economic growth, and we really are in a deep hole here. We look at Kenya. Their economy is expected to grow by 6%.
Absolutely.
Ghana, this year they're looking at 7.5%, 5.6% next year. Ethiopia looking at 7% growth. We are struggling to get to 1%.
And for the most advanced economy in the continent, it is actually very unfortunate that we're sitting where we're sitting as a country. But you'd see it is also in the function of the policies that we have as a country, and to what extent are they geared to ensure that foreign direct investment comes into the country. But it's not also only a function of foreign direct investment, it's a foreign of local investors as well. So you're actually going to have to say, what are some of the things that I'm going to have to do to position myself, as an investment destination? And unless and until you do that and put policies in place that talk to that, you are not going to achieve what you need to achieve.
So I think, forget about foreign direct investment. Let's talk to business in South Africa. And you with Business Leadership South Africa, 1.3 trillion rand in reserves, we are told business is sitting within this country. Why is business not investing in South Africa?
You're also going to have to know that when you look at the JSE listed companies, a lot of them are multinationals, Sakina. So that therefore means, the issue of visas, for instance, skills visas, and unfortunately, the The unfortunate reality is that you're not going to have foreign money come into the country without some form of experts. So if you therefore are going to take 9 months to process an expert application, as the South African government, it doesn't augur well for investment,
Is that the only reason, though?
That's not the only reasons, but some of the policies. I think we talked about prescribed assets, we talked about the South African Reserve Bank, you actually spoke about what, the amendment of Section 25 means in as far as the property rights are concerned, because remember, if you're going to put money into the country, and actually say, and if you're going to generate productive assets, you're actually going to have some degree of certainty that I have property rights in as far as these assets are concerned. If you're not going to be getting that guarantee, then unfortunately you sit in a situation where investment is either delayed or cancelled. And that is what we're actually seeing in South Africa at the moment, at least from a business perspective.
Well, unfortunately, that is where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to Busi Mavuso, a CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, sharing her views on the medium-term policy statement delivered by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni yesterday. Let's take a break.